Hey, welcome. You know that idea we all kind of take for granted that leaders, presidents, kings, nobody should have absolute unchecked power? Well, it turns out that idea is way, way older than you might think. Today, we're going to dig into its surprisingly ancient roots. So let me ask you, is any ruler truly absolute? I mean, today, most of us would probably jump up and say, no way, of course not. We're all about checks and balances, accountability, the idea that there are laws even for the people at the very top. But, and this is a big but, that's a pretty new way of thinking. For most of human history, the default answer was a hard, definite yes. Yeah, the default setting for power was basically absolute. You had kings, pharaohs, emperors, and whatever they said, that was the law. Period. Why? Well, a lot of the time they were seen as actual gods, or at least handpicked by them, so you didn't really argue with that. But then, something totally different started bubbling up from this collection of ancient texts. And this new idea, this game changer, it wasn't born out of some big political uprising. It was a theological revolution. It was all about this idea of a sacred contract, or as it's called in the Hebrew Bible, a pact. Okay, so what's a bakta or a covenant? Think of it this way. It's not a command from on high. It's a two-way street, a mutual agreement. And here's the key part. It has obligations for both sides. That's huge. The idea that even the highest authority is bound by an agreement, well, that's a little seed that would grow into a massive tree in political thinking. So let's break that down. You've got two completely different models here. On one side, you have the absolute decree. That's the classic top-down, do-as-I-say command. But on the other, you have this new covenant model. It's all about mutual promises. Suddenly, it's not just the people who have to obey. The authority is also bound by the rules of the deal. And right there, that's the beginning of the idea that power has limits. Right, so if you have a contract, you need two things, right? You need to know the rules of the game, and you need a ref. And that brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, a law that even the king has to answer to. And that's where law, with a capital L, steps in. This isn't just a random list of do's and don'ts. It's the actual nuts and bolts that makes the whole pact idea work in the real world. It lays out the responsibilities for everyone, and here's the kicker, including the rulers. For the first time, really, you have this written standard that sits above the king, a higher law that he can't just ignore. Okay, but who's the ref? Who calls a foul when the king breaks the rules? Well, that's where the prophet comes in. And we're not talking about some fortune teller with a crystal ball. Think of the prophet as a powerful political commentator, a public conscience. Their job was to stand up, point a finger at injustice and abuse of power, and remind the king, hey, remember that pact? You're not holding up your end of the bargain. They were the original accountability system. And this really gets to the heart of it. In this worldview, power never gets a free pass. It's never just accepted without question. There's always a yardstick to measure it by. That's the law. And there's always a voice ready to speak up when things go wrong. That's the prophet. Okay, now we're going to jump way forward in time. Put on your seatbelts. We're going to the 16th century. Because this is when these ancient ideas about pacts and higher laws got dug up, dusted off, and basically lit a fire under European politics during the Reformation. You can almost see this golden thread of an idea running through history. You have the pact established way back in ancient Israel. Then you have the prophets calling out kings. Then, a long pause. But in the 16th century, that thread gets picked back up, and it leads directly to brand new theories about why it might be okay, even necessary, to resist a tyrannical ruler. So how did this happen? It was kind of a perfect storm. First, you have the reformers saying, hey, the ultimate authority isn't any person or institution, it's the text itself. Second, you have a technological revolution, the printing press. Suddenly, Bibles aren't just for priests anymore. They're getting into the hands of regular people. And third, when regular people start reading this stuff for themselves, they see these stories of prophets standing up to kings, and they start getting ideas. And the result was, well, profound. Suddenly, people had a powerful framework, a moral language to say, wait a minute, if our king is breaking this sacred pact, he's not just a bad ruler, he's an unjust ruler. This changed everything. Resisting the king wasn't just treason anymore, it could be seen as a moral duty. Okay, so we've traced this idea from an ancient text to a European revolution. But how did it become so fundamental to the way we think about politics today? Let's talk about that lasting echo. Now, to be clear, this biblical tradition wasn't working in a vacuum. It's not the only ingredient in the recipe for modern democracy. Think of it more like a really important conversation. You have these biblical ideas about contracts and justice, talking to Greek ideas about the role of the citizen, and Roman ideas about structured law. All of them came together to build the foundation we're standing on. But what this tradition really brought to the table was a powerful moral language. It hammered home a few key concepts. That power is a contract. That rulers have to answer to a higher moral law, that the whole point of power is to achieve justice, and, maybe most radically, that resisting a tyrant can be a legitimate, even righteous thing to do. When you boil it all down, it comes back to this one simple but world-changing idea, an idea that is echoed from those ancient prophets all the way to our modern voting booths. Power is not absolute. It always has to be judged, evaluated, and held accountable. Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty big question for today, for right now. We don't exactly have prophets standing in the halls of government anymore. So if we still think of power as a contract, a pact between us and the people who lead us, whose job is it to hold them accountable? Who are the prophets now? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this one.